The floor in my room was currently having a nervous breakdown, which made two of us. In the Xylari hegemony, architecture doesn't just sit there looking pretty, it has an opinion. At the moment, the floor of my detention suite was shifting into a series of jagged obsidian ridges that made standing upright a literal pain in the ass. It was reacting to my stress, and since I was currently the most hated man in several star systems, my stress levels were off the charts. "Listen, buddy," I muttered, patting a wall that felt suspiciously like warm velvet. "I'm not thrilled about being here either. If you could just flatten out into a nice neutral rug, I'd stop vibrating with enough anxiety to power a small scout ship." The wall pulsed a dull, throbbing violet. My cortex bridge, the little bugger of an implant nestled against my brainstem, chirped a translation. "Hostility confusion. Subject Kalen Thorne exhibits erratic bio-narrative. The structure requests emotional recalibration." "Yeah, tell the structure to join the club," I snapped. I sat down on a chair that immediately turned into a stool because it apparently didn't think I deserved a backrest. I looked at the floating sensor drone hovering in the corner. It was a silver sphere, sleek and judgmental. "Is the feed live?" I asked, smoothing my rumpled diplomatic tunic. "Are the arch synapses watching?" "Good, because I've got a statement. First off, I didn't do it. Second off, I don't even know if I can do it with someone who has ears that long. No offense to the Queen, she's a smoke show, truly, but I'm pretty sure our biologies are about as compatible as a toaster and a tidal wave." The drone stayed silent. In Xylari culture, silence was the ultimate "screw you." I leaned forward, resting my chin in my hands. "You guys wanted an envoy. You wanted someone expendable who could handle the resonance without having their brain turned into a smoothie. Well, congrats. You got Kalen Thorne. Kalen. And now your queen says, I'm the father of the next heir to the hegemony? That's some high-octane nonsense, even for a guy who once accidentally joined a cult in the Martian underground." I stood up and started pacing. The floor groaned, its obsidian ridges smoothing out into a greasy, slippery surface. It was trying to trip me. "I'm just a guy," I told the drone. "A guy who makes bad jokes when he's scared. And right now, I'm absolutely terrified. But let's get one thing straight. If I'm going to be the consort of chaos, or whatever your tabloid equivalents are calling me, I want some decent coffee. This bio-slurry you've been feeding me tastes like a battery had a midlife crisis." Suddenly, the door didn't slide open. Naturally, it dissolved. Two guards stood there. They were nearly 7 feet tall, their skin a shimmering, pearlescent gray, their long ears swept back like the wings of a predatory bird. Their armor didn't have plates. It was a living chitinous weave that hummed with the sound of 1,000 angry bees. "The Queen requests your presence," the guard on the left said. Or rather, my implant translated his pheromonal shift into those words. "Is it a request or a get your feet moving before we drag you kind of deal?" I asked. The guard's ears flicked forward. Translation, tactical necessity, high urgency. "Right," I sighed. "Let's move. Time to see if I'm getting a crown or a one-way ticket to a black hole." As I stepped out of the room, the floor behind me turned into a puddle of gray sludge. It really didn't like me. "Nice knowing you too, Floor," I whispered. "If you want to understand how I ended up being a biological anomaly's alleged baby daddy, you have to understand the first day I set foot on Ethelgard. The United Earth Coalition had sent me because I was a statistical neutrality. That's a fancy way of saying I was so average, so profoundly uninteresting on paper, that I wouldn't trigger any of the Xylari's aggressive defense protocols. My job was simple. Sit in a room, look at the Queen, and say, Earth would like to trade some minerals for that cool gravity-defying tech you guys have. Simple, right? Wrong. The first time I saw Queen Alara Vane, she was sitting on the throne of decision. It wasn't a chair, it was a swirling vortex of light and intent that responded to her every thought. She looked like a goddess carved out of starlight, but with ears that could probably hear a pin drop in the next galaxy. I had bowed so low I nearly cracked my forehead on the living floor. "Rise, human," she had said. Her voice didn't come from her throat. It resonated directly inside my skull. It was smooth, like expensive whiskey, but it carried the weight of 10,000 years of rule. "Thank you, Your Majesty," I'd said, standing up and immediately feeling like I was wearing a cheap suit to a royal wedding, which I was. "I'm Kalen. I'm here representing the Coalition. We're big fans of your work. The whole ruling the sector thing, very impressive. 5 stars on Yelp. The court went silent. Thousands of Xylari nobles, hovering on their biomechanical supports, tilted their heads in unison. My cortex bridge vibrated. Warning, untranslatable concept. Yelp. Contextualizing as sacrilegious comparison to a consumer rating system. I shouted, waving my hands. It's an honor, truly. I'm just a bit nervous. I tend to babble when I'm in the presence of beings who can rewrite my DNA with a squint. Elara had studied me then. Her eyes were deep pools of shifting violet, and for a second I felt the resonance. It was like a cold wind blowing through my thoughts, searching for something. It found my memory of a failed date in New York, the smell of rain on hot asphalt, and a joke I'd told to a bartender about a priest and a cyborg. She had tilted her head, her ears curved forward, a gesture of intense curiosity. "You are noisy," she said. "I've been told that," I replied. "My mom says I was born with a silver tongue and a lead brain." "Your mind does not align with the collective," she continued, stepping down from her throne. The floor rose to meet her feet, creating steps out of thin air. "It ripples. It is full of leverage on, as you call it. You hide behind these verbal puzzles. They're called jokes, Your Majesty. We use them so we don't have to face the fact that we're basically hairless monkeys floating on a rock in a very large, very empty room." She had walked right up to me then. She was taller than me, smelling of ozone and ancient parchment. She reached out, her fingers hovering just inches from my chest. I could feel the heat radiating from her skin. "Teach me," she had whispered. "Teach you what? How to bomb at a comedy club?" "Teach me how to be uncertain," she said. "The resonance provides us with all answers. We have forgotten how to ask the right questions." That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, we'd walked in the bioluminescent gardens. I told her about Earth, about how we fail and get back up, and how we laugh at the darkness, because if we didn't, we'd never stop crying. I thought we were just having a very expensive interspecies therapy session. I was wrong. Now, as I followed the guards toward the Great Hall of Synapse, the memory of her looking at me in the garden, truly looking at me, felt like a lead weight in my stomach. "Hey," I said to the guard as we turned a corner, "do you guys have any laws against, biological intermingling? Just curious. Asking for a friend who is currently in deep, deep trouble." The guard didn't even twitch an ear. "Tough crowd," I muttered. "I really miss Earth. At least there, if people want to kill you, they usually shout it first." We reached the massive membranes of the Great Hall. They shimmered with a sickly gold light. This was it, the climax of the worst first contact story in human history. I took a deep breath, adjusted my tie, and prepared my best "I'm just a confused idiot" face. "Don't worry, Kalen," I whispered to myself. "You've survived worse. Remember that time in the lunar colonies with the oxygen leak and the angry mime? This is just like that, but with more space magic and a pregnant queen." The membranes parted. The smell of 1,000 pheromones hit me like a physical wall. I stepped inside, and the entire Xylari hegemony turned to look at the man who had supposedly broken the universe. "Okay," I said, my voice cracking just a little. "I'm here. Who wants to start the shouting?" The queen was standing at the center. She didn't look like a goddess today. She looked like a woman who was carrying a secret that was heavier than a planet. And when she saw me, she didn't smile. She just watched, her ears angled forward in that gesture of trust I'd come to fear. "Kalen Thorne," she said, her voice echoing through the resonance. "The council demands an explanation for the resonance shift within my body." "Your Majesty," I said, bowing so fast I almost fell over. "I'd love to give you one, but I think we need to talk about the birds and the bees first, because I'm pretty sure someone skipped a few chapters in the manual." The arch-synapse Valas stepped forward, his eyes glowing with a cold blue fire. "This is no time for leverage, human. You have introduced a variable into the royal lineage. You have integrated." "Integrated?" I barked a laugh. "I haven't even had a decent meal in 3 days. If I'm integrating, it's purely by accident." "The palace systems do not lie," Volus countered. "Since your arrival, the biological harmony of the Ethelgard has tilted toward your frequency. The Queen's condition is a direct result of this resonance." I looked at Alara. She was watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Is that true?" I asked her, my voice dropping. "Did I do this just by being noisy?" "You bent the world, Kalen," she whispered, "and now the world is bending back." Well, damn, I guess I really was the father. "I'm gonna need a much bigger drink than I thought," I sighed. The silence that followed the Queen's declaration wasn't just a lack of sound. In the Ethelgard, silence was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket of unprocessed intent that made the air feel like cooling lead. My cortex bridge was screaming, a high-pitched digital whine at the back of my skull as it tried to parse the sheer volume of "what the hell" radiating from the thousands of Xylari nobles. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice sounding thin and absurdly human in the vastness of the Hall of Synapse. "I think there's been a bit of a glitch in the translation. Did you say I'm a father, or did you say I'm a feather? Because one of those involves a very confusing biological miracle, and the other involves me being light enough to blow out of this airlock and never come back." Queen Alara Vane didn't move. She stood atop the shifting dais, her long ears held in a rigid, vertical posture that screamed absolute authority. Below her, the arched synapses looked like they were ready to undergo spontaneous combustion. "Kalen Thorne," Alara said, her voice resonating through the neural network with the force of a tectonic shift. "The continuity of the hegemony has been altered. The child I carry is a bridge. It is a resonance of my lineage and your discordance." "Discordance?" I let out a sharp, jagged laugh. "That's a fancy word for messy. Look, Your Majesty, back on Earth, when two people, well, when two things have a kid, there's usually a bit more physical proximity involved. I've been here for 22 days. We've talked about philosophy, we've walked in the garden, and I've complained about the lack of real cheese. That's it. That's the whole highlight reel. I'm pretty sure I haven't even sneezed on you." Arch Synapse Volus stepped forward, his pearlescent skin turning a bruised shade of indigo. "You misunderstand the nature of our biology, human. We are a species of resonance. Our forms are dictated by the frequency of our shared consciousness. You are a biological noise generator. Your presence, your thoughts, your very lack of discipline has acted as a mutagenic catalyst. You didn't do anything. You simply occurred at her." "I occurred at her?" I blinked, feeling a surge of that familiar, defensive sarcasm. Wow, that's the worst pickup line in the history of the galaxy. "Hey baby, I'm just gonna occur at you until we have a baby." You guys really need to get out more. This whole living in a giant space brain thing is making you weird. "Enough," Volus shouted, and the living walls of the chamber rippled in a wave of jagged, thorny protrusions. "The integrity of the Xylari line has been compromised by a creature that still thinks humor is a survival strategy." "It is a survival strategy," I shot back, stepping into his space. He was a head taller than me, smelling of dry ozone and ancient laws, but I was too panicked to be polite. "I'm a 34-year-old guy from a planet where we still use umbrellas when it rains. I'm expendable, remember? That's why I'm here. If I'm a variable that broke your math, maybe your math was too stiff to begin with." The Queen raised a hand. It was a simple gesture, but the entire hall froze. The jagged thorns on the walls smoothed out instantly into soft, glowing moss. "The human stays," she commanded. "He is not a prisoner. He is a factor. We will observe the integration." "With all due respect, Your Majesty," Volus hissed, his ears angling back in a gesture of suppressed rage. "This is a cluster flub of galactic proportions. If the distant colonies hear that the Queen is carrying a hybrid of a level 3 civilization envoy, we'll have a full-blown insurrection before the next orbital cycle." "Let them talk," Alara said, her gaze fixed on me. "The resonance has been stagnant for 3,000 years. We have perfection, Volus, but we have no growth. This human, he brings the gift of the unknown." The guards stepped toward me, but they didn't reach for their weapons. They just stood there waiting. I looked around at the thousands of alien eyes, violet, blue, amber, all staring at me as if I were a bomb that had just decided to start a countdown. "Right," I muttered, rubbing the back of my neck where the implant was still buzzing. "So no pressure then. Just the fate of an empire and a biological impossibility resting on the shoulders of a guy who once got his head stuck in a vending machine." "Is that a metaphor?" a nearby noble whispered, her ears twitching in confusion. No, I sighed. It was a very long Tuesday. Look, if I'm going to be part of this, whatever this is, I'm going to need to sit down. My legs feel like they're made of wet noodles, and I think I'm about to have a very human moment involving my lunch. The floor beneath me obligingly softened into a low, comfortable-looking couch. It felt like it was trying to be sympathetic, which was even more unsettling than when it was trying to trip me. The proceedings are recessed, Alara announced. The council will reconvene in 6 hours. Kaylin Thorne, you will accompany me to the High Conservatory. We have things to discuss that do not require the input of 1,000 terrified bureaucrats. As the crowd began to disperse, moving in that fluid, synchronized way that always made me feel like I was watching a ballet choreographed by a computer, Volus leaned in close to me. Don't think this makes you special, human, he whispered, his pheromones smelling like burnt rubber. In our world, a variable that cannot be solved is usually deleted. Yeah, I said, waving him off with a trembling hand. I've heard the threaten the hero speech before. You're coming in at about a 4 out of 10 on the intimidation scale. My high school gym teacher was scarier than you. He didn't know what a gym teacher was, but the tone translated perfectly. He stiffened, his ears snapping shut, and marched away. I sat there for a moment, alone on my living couch, watching the artificial stars drift across the ceiling of the hall. I was a father. Sort of. I was a catalyst. Definitely. And I was almost certainly going to die before this was over. Well, Kaylin, I whispered, at least you won't have to worry about paying for college, unless these guys use credits for that too. I stood up, my boots apologizing to the floor with every step, and followed the queen into the heart of the palace. I felt like a small, clumsy shadow trailing behind a sun. I didn't feel like a father. I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt like a mistake that was being allowed to breathe for a few more hours. But as I walked, I noticed something. A small bioluminescent plant near the doorway, which had been a dull, sickly yellow since I arrived, suddenly pulsed with a vibrant neon green as I passed. It wasn't a Zalari color. It was something else. Something messy. Something mine. Maybe, I thought, being a mistake isn't the worst thing in the world. Sometimes you have to break the machine to see how it works. The High Conservatory was a place of impossible beauty and even more impossible physics. Trees that looked like they were made of spun glass reached toward a sky that was actually a massive, transparent shield overlooking the swirling nebulae of the Zalari home system. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and something sharply metallic, like a fresh lightning strike. Queen Alara was standing by a pool of liquid silver, her back to me. Her long ears were drooping slightly, the first sign of weariness I had ever seen in her. Sit, she said, without turning. A chair, actually a cluster of soft, mossy globes, grew out of the ground. I sat. I didn't have much of a choice. My knees were still doing a nervous jig. So, I started because silence makes me want to itch. Is there a name for this? In your culture, I mean. When a queen has a child with a noisy alien who spends most of his time trying not to offend the furniture? It has never happened, she said, turning to face me. Our reproduction is a matter of calculated harmony. We select the most compatible neural frequencies, merge them within the resonance, and a new life is synthesized. It is precise, it is beautiful, it is certain. And I'm the opposite of certain, I said. I'm the guy who forgets where he put his keys 2 minutes after holding them. I'm the guy who thinks maybe is a complete sentence. Yes, she said, walking toward me. Her eyes were searching mine, and for the first time, I didn't look away. The physicians are baffled. They say your biological signature has leaked into the palace systems. You are gritty, Kaylin. Your thoughts have edges. They are not smooth like ours. And somehow, my body chose those edges. Look, Alara, I said, using her name for the first time. I saw her ears twitch at the familiarity, but she didn't stop me. Back home, we have this thing called the butterfly effect. One small flap of a wing, and you get a hurricane on the other side of the planet. I think I'm just a very loud butterfly. I didn't mean to break your traditions. I was just trying to survive the meetings without falling asleep. She sat on a globe opposite me. Volus wants to terminate the process. He thinks you are a virus. He's not entirely wrong, I muttered. I've been a headache for my government since I was 12 years old. But a virus? That's a bit harsh. I prefer unplanned upgrade. He will try to provoke you, she warned. The council session in 2 hours will not be a discussion. It will be an interrogation. They will try to prove that humanity sent you here as a bioweapon. They will try to show that your humor is a form of psychological warfare designed to destabilize the resonance. I barked a laugh. Psychological warfare? I'm using dad jokes to keep from crying. If that's a weapon, then Earth is a lot more dangerous than I thought. To them it is, she said softly. To them, anything that cannot be predicted is a threat. They don't understand that the universe doesn't care about our predictions. It happens anyway. I looked at her, really looked at her. Beneath the regal posture and the alien features, there was a flicker of something very familiar. Fear. Not the loud, screaming fear of a soldier in a trench, but the quiet, heavy fear of someone who realizes they are no longer in control of their own life. You're scared, I said. Her ears snapped back against her head. I am the queen of the hegemony. I do not— Stop it, I interrupted. You're talking to the guy who occurred at you, remember? You can drop the act. You're scared because for the first time in 3,000 years, you don't know what happens next. Welcome to the human experience. It sucks, the pay is terrible, but the view is usually pretty decent. She stayed silent for a long time, the silver pool behind her rippling in response to her shifting mood. Then slowly, her ears relaxed. Is it always like this for you? She asked. This weight of not knowing? Every single day, I said. We wake up, we hope the sun comes up, and we hope we don't trip over our own feet. We live in the gaps between the certainties. It's exhausting, but it's also the only thing that makes life worth living. If you knew everything that was going to happen, why bother getting out of bed? She reached out and touched my hand. Her skin was cool, but it felt alive in a way the rest of the palace didn't. It felt real. Teach me that, she said. Teach me how to live in the gaps. I think you're already doing it, I said, giving her hand a small squeeze. Now let's go deal with those stuffed shirt advisors of yours. If they want an interrogation, let's give them a show. But first, can I get a glass of water? Or whatever you guys have that isn't glowing purple? My mouth feels like I've been chewing on a carpet. She smiled then, a real, genuine smile that reached her violet eyes. I will see what I can find, she said. And Kalen? Yeah? Try not to tell the arch synapse he is a 4 out of 10. It was effective, but highly irregular. Hey, I grinned, feeling that familiar spark of defiance. In my world, irregular is just another word for Tuesday. The council chamber was packed. If the Hall of Synapse was a ballet, this was a trial. I was stood in the center of a circular platform that felt suspiciously like a witness stand. Around me, the arch synapses sat in elevated tiers, their long ears angled toward me like a forest of radar dishes. Volus stood at the front, holding a glowing data slate that looked like it contained a list of all my sins, plus a few he'd probably made up for flavor. Envoy Thorn, Volus began, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics until it felt like it was vibrating in my teeth. We have analyzed your biochemical output since the announcement. We have found traces of adrenaline, cortisol, and an unidentified compound your species calls caffeine. Explain your intent. My intent was to stay awake during your lecture on orbital logistics, I said, crossing my arms. It was a 3-hour talk, Volus. On Earth, we call that a snooze fest. I needed a kickstart. My bad. I didn't realize my latte was going to be an act of war. Do not play with us, Volus roared, and the floor beneath me vibrated. Your presence has caused a cascade failure in our reproductive protocols. The Queen's cellular structure is now responding to your emotional state. When you are panicked, she experiences neural spikes. When you are humorous, her resonance destabilizes. You are a parasite. I felt the anger bubbling up, that hot, sharp human heat that doesn't care about protocols. A parasite? You guys invited me. You wanted a statistically neutral representative so you could check a box on your diplomatic to-do list. You didn't want a person, you wanted a prop. But guess what? I'm a person, I'm messy, I'm loud, and I have a lot of feelings about how you treat your queen like she's a piece of hardware. She is the hegemony, an advisor from the third tier shouted. No, I yelled back, my voice cracking. She's a person, and she's pregnant. And instead of asking her how she feels, you're standing around measuring my cortisol levels like I'm a lab rat. You're so worried about continuity that you've forgotten what you're actually continuing. Life isn't a math problem, you idiots. It's a riot. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't leaden. It was electric. The Zalari nobles were leaning forward, their ears twitching in a way I hadn't seen before. They weren't just listening. They were feeling the edge of my words. Volus looked at the slate, then back at me. His pearlescent skin was pale. You admit to being a riot? I admit to being human, I said, my voice softening but staying firm. And yeah, sometimes that looks like a riot. But you know what else it looks like? It looks like hope. It looks like changing when the old ways don't work anymore. You're afraid of this kid because you don't know what frequency it's going to vibrate at. Well, I've got news for you. Neither do I. And that's the best part. I looked up at Alara, who was watching from her throne. She didn't say anything, but I saw her hand rest briefly on her stomach. It was a small human gesture, a mother's gesture. If you want to delete me, go ahead, I told the council. But you can't delete the change. It's already in the walls. It's in the floor. It's in her. You can't go back to certainty now. The cat is out of the bag, and on Earth, we usually let the cat stay out because cats are a pain to catch. Volus opened his mouth to respond, but a low hum started to vibrate through the chamber. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. The palace was responding to my words. The floor beneath the council members began to pulse with a warm, amber light, the color of a sunset on Earth. The resonance, Volus whispered, his ears drooping in shock. It is agreeing? It's not agreeing, I said, feeling a sudden, strange sense of peace. It's just listening. Maybe for the first time in 3,000 years, it's actually curious. I turned and walked off the platform. The guards didn't stop me. They didn't even move. They just watched me pass, their long ears curving in that gesture of trust. I walked back toward my suite, my boots apologizing to the floor as usual. But this time, the floor didn't try to trip me. It felt firm, supportive. One small step for man, I whispered to the empty corridor. One giant headache for the hegemony. I knew the fight wasn't over. Volus would come back. The distant colonies would freak out. The universe would continue to be a terrifying, unpredictable place. But as I reached my door, I saw a single small flower growing out of a crack in the living wall. It wasn't purple. It wasn't gold. It was a bright, stubborn white. I touched its petals and laughed. See? I told the wall. I told you I was a riot. Shushurm. The high conservatory usually felt like a cathedral of light, but tonight it felt like a tomb. I was 34 years old, and for the first time in my life, I wished I were back in a cramped, windowless apartment in New Jersey. At least there, the walls didn't breathe when they were depressed. You're brooding, I said, leaning against a crystalline pillar that was vibrating at a frequency I could only describe as existential dread. On Earth, we usually save this level of intensity for when the internet goes out or we run out of coffee. You're taking it to a professional level, Alara. The queen was standing by the silver pool, but it wasn't liquid anymore. It had frozen into a jagged metallic sculpture, reflecting her own inner turmoil. She didn't look at me. Her long ears were pressed flat against her skull, a sign of deep distress that even my translator didn't need to explain. The resonance is fracturing, Kaelin, she whispered. Her voice sounded like glass cracking. The council, they have begun to sever their neural links to the throne. They are terrified that your noise is contagious. They would rather be deaf than hear what you have to say. So they're ghosting you, I said, pushing off the pillar and walking toward her. That's a classic human move. When things get real, people bail. It's a coward's way of staying in control. They are not bailing, she snapped, her eyes flashing a violent shade of amethyst. They are preparing. Volus has moved the 9th century fleet to the inner ring of Ethelgard. They aren't protecting us from the outside. They are containing the infection within. I felt a cold shiver crawl down my spine. Okay, so we've moved from awkward dinner party to full-blown military blockade. That's a hell of a jump. What's the plan? Do we call for a diplomatic recess, or do I start looking for an escape pod that fits a human and a very tall, very pregnant alien queen? She finally turned to me, too. Her skin looked translucent, the glowing patterns beneath her surface dimming and flickering. There is no escape from Ethelgard, Kalen. The station is alive. If the Council shuts down the primary neural core, the atmosphere will stop recycling. The lights will fade. The palace will die, and we will die with it. I looked around at the impossible beauty of the conservatory, the glass trees, the artificial stars, the mossy seating. All of it was part of a giant, sentient organism that was currently being lobotomized because I couldn't keep my mouth shut. "This is on me," I said, the words feeling like lead in my throat. "I came here. I made my jokes. I acted like the universe was just one big punchline. I thought being the funny guy was my shield, but I didn't realize my shield was hitting everyone else like a wrecking ball." "No," Alara said, stepping closer. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed the sleeve of my tunic. "You didn't break us, Kalen. You just showed us the cracks that were already there. We were so perfect that we had become fragile. A single note of discordance shouldn't destroy an empire. If it does, then the empire was already a ghost." Suddenly, the ground lurched. It wasn't a tremor, it was a groan. The entire station shuddered and the artificial stars above us flickered and died, leaving us in a haunting, bioluminescent twilight. "That was the primary core," Alara whispered. "Volus has done it. He's cutting us off. He's going to kill his own queen just to keep the status quo." I felt a surge of genuine, unadulterated anger. That's not loyalty. That's a power trip. That's a grade A, gold-plated jerk move. "He believes he is saving our species," she said, her ears twitching as she listened to the dying hum of the station. "He believes that if he can purge the variable, you and the child, the resonance will heal itself." "Well, he's got another thing coming," I said, straightening my jacket. I felt that old, familiar spark of defiance, the one that usually got me kicked out of bars or fired from jobs. But this time, it felt different. It felt necessary. I've spent my whole life being the guy people wanted to purge. I'm an expert at being a nuisance. If Volus wants a war of wills, he's picked the wrong hairless monkey to mess with. "What are you doing?" she asked as I started walking toward the exit. "I'm going to talk to the house," I said. "You said the station is alive, right? It responds to intent?" "Well, the council might have the keys, but I've got the noise. If I can't outthink them, I'll outfeel them." "Kalen, it's dangerous. The neural feedback could—" "I'm already a biological weapon, according to Volus," I shouted back over my shoulder. "Might as well start acting like one. Stay here. Keep the kid calm. I'm going to go find the thermostat and turn the heat back on." I ran out of the conservatory and into the darkening corridors. The floor was cold now, unresponsive. The walls were gray and static. The palace wasn't just losing power, it was losing its soul. I reached the central nexus, a massive chamber where the station's brain, a sphere of pulsing golden psiomatter, was suspended in a magnetic field. Usually it was a sun, blinding and beautiful. Now it was a dying coal, sputtering with a sickly, rhythmic throb. Volus was there, surrounded by a dozen guards. He was holding a control scepter, his long ears swept back in a posture of grim determination. "Stand down, human," he commanded, his voice echoing in the hollow chamber. "The process is irreversible. The Ethelgard is entering a state of stasis. We will preserve the genetic data of our people until the noise has dissipated." "Stasis is just a fancy word for a coffin, Volus," I yelled, stepping into the center of the room. The guards raised their chitinous weapons, but I didn't stop. "You're killing your world because you're scared of a little change. You're scared that if you let one human in, the whole perfect lie will fall apart." "It is not a lie," he screamed, his skin turning a dark, bruised purple. "It is harmony. It is who we are." "No," I said, stopping 10 meters from him. I could feel the cold radiating from the dying core. "It's a cage, and you're the lock. But here's the thing about cages, Volus. They're only strong as long as everyone inside is willing to stay small." I closed my eyes. I didn't know how to interface with the resonance. I didn't have the training, the biology, or the grace. All I had was the mess. I thought about Earth. I thought about the smell of rain on hot pavement, the sound of a crowded subway, the feeling of a first kiss that was clumsy and perfect. I thought about every failure I'd ever had, every joke that had bombed, every time I'd been told I wasn't enough. I took all that grit, all that noise, and I threw it at the golden sphere. I am Kalen Thorne, I thought with every fiber of my being, and I am a total disaster. I am flawed, I am loud, I am selfish, and I am terrified. And I am beautiful because of it. The sphere pulsed. "What are you doing?" Volus demanded, his scepter sparking. "Stop this! You are polluting the core!" I didn't stop. I leaned into the darkness. I showed the Ethel Guard what it meant to be human. I showed it the color of humor, that bright, jagged yellow that cuts through the blue of certainty. I showed it the weight of hope, that heavy, stubborn anchor that keeps us from drifting away when the stars go out. The chamber began to shake, not the dying shudder from before, but a violent, rhythmic throb. The walls turned a vibrant, chaotic orange. The floor beneath Volus's feet began to ripple like water. "It's not listening to you anymore, Volus," I shouted, my nose beginning to bleed from the sheer mental pressure. "It's listening to the riot." The golden sphere didn't return to its old steady light. It exploded into a kaleidoscope of colors. The resonance didn't heal. It evolved. It shattered into a million individual frequencies, each one a unique, messy, beautiful voice. Volus fell to his knees, his scepter clattering to the floor. His ears were twitching wildly, unable to process the sudden influx of individuality. The guards dropped their weapons, their armor humming in a confused, melodic harmony. I stood there gasping for air as the lights returned to the station. Not the cold, perfect white of before, but a warm, flickering amber that felt like home. The turning point had come. The empire wasn't dead, but the hegemony was over. The aftermath of a revolution usually involves a lot of shouting, but on Ethelgard, it was strangely quiet. The silence was different now. It wasn't a wait, but a space, a gap. I was sitting in a medical bay that looked like it was grown out of pearl and silk. A Zalari physician was hovering over me, her long ears angling toward my chest as she monitored my heart rate. She didn't look clinical anymore. She looked curious. "Your heart," she whispered, her translator rendering the awe in her voice. "It beats with such irregularity. It is like a drum that has forgotten the rhythm but found a song." "That's just the 3 cups of space coffee and the near-death experience talking," I croaked. My head felt like it had been put through a blender, and my nose was still tender. "How's the Queen? How's the situation?" "The Queen is resting," the doctor said, her fingers grazing my arm with a lightness that felt like a blessing. "The child is stable, but the situation, as you call it, is complicated. The resonance has not returned to its previous state. We are all hearing things, our own thoughts. They are no longer part of the collective stream. They are our own." "Welcome to the club," I said, trying to sit up. "It's a bit noisy at first, but you get used to the company." The door to the medbay opened, and Alara walked in. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were bright, a deep, glowing violet that seemed to hold 1,000 new questions. Behind her, Volus walked with his head bowed, his hands bound by a soft, glowing thread. "Kalen," Alara said, her voice stronger than I expected. "You are awake." "Barely," I said. "I see you brought the party pooper with you. What's the verdict? Are we spacing him, or does he get a stern talking to?" Volus looked up, and for the first time I saw the cost of his certainty. His skin was dull, his ears drooping with the weight of a world he no longer understood. He didn't look like a villain anymore. He just looked like a man whose map had been burned. "He is here to witness," Alara said, gesturing for the guards to stay back. "He believes that by breaking the resonance, you have doomed us to chaos. He believes that without the collective, we are nothing." I looked at Volus. "You really think that? You think that because you can't hear everyone else's grocery list in your head, you don't exist?" "We were one," Volus hissed, his voice cracking. "We were a symphony. Now we are just notes, lost in the void. How can we rule? How can we survive when every Xylari is a law unto themselves? I swung my legs over the side of the bed, ignoring the doctor's protest. I stood up, feeling a bit shaky, and walked over to him. You were a symphony where no one was allowed to play a solo, Volus, I said, my voice quiet but sharp. That's not music. That's a recording, and recordings eventually wear out. And what are we now? He asked, his eyes filled with a desperate, hollow fear. What is this riot you have brought upon us? It's called freedom, I said. And yeah, it's terrifying. It's the scariest thing in the universe. Because now, if you fail, it's on you. But if you succeed, if you create something beautiful, or love someone, or even just make a halfway decent joke, that's on you too. It's yours. No one can take that away from you. I looked at Ilara, and then at the doctor, and then at the guards. Look at them, Volus. They aren't dying. They're listening. They're hearing their own hearts for the first time in millennia. They're realizing that they aren't just parts of a machine. They're people. The humanistic theme I had been carrying like a hidden weapon was finally out in the open. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being present. It was about accepting that the messiness of our existence isn't a flaw to be corrected, but the very source of our strength. The cost of your certainty was our growth, Ilara said, turning to Volus. You would have kept us in a golden cage forever. But Kaelin showed us that the cage was only as strong as our fear of the outside. She turned back to me, her expression softening. But the transition will be hard. The distant colonies are already experiencing the great silence. They are confused. They are angry. They will come for us, Kaelin. They will come to find the virus that broke their world. Let them come, I said, feeling a strange, calm certainty of my own. We'll just have to teach them how to handle the noise, one person at a time. You speak as if you are staying, Ilara noted, her ears angling forward in a question. I looked at the window, where the nebulae were swirling in a chaotic, beautiful dance of color and light. I thought about Earth, about the boring meetings, the taxes, the rain, and the people who never quite understood me. Then I looked at the Queen, carrying a child that was half human, half mystery, in a world that was just beginning to wake up. I'm 34 years old, I said, a small grin tugging at the corner of my mouth. I was an expendable diplomat who was statistically neutral, but I think I finally found something I'm actually good at. And what is that? She asked. Being a nuisance, I said, and being a dad. I hear both require a lot of the same skills, mostly staying up late and making sure people don't kill each other. She laughed then, a loud, clear sound that echoed through the medical bay. It wasn't a queen's laugh. It was a person's laugh. And in the corner, I saw one of the guard's ears twitch in a way that looked suspiciously like a smile. But the moment was broken by a sudden, urgent ping from the station's scanners. Your Majesty, a voice crackled through the local intercom, no longer a neural pulse, but a digital signal. We have multiple warp signatures entering the system. It's the Ninth Fleet. They aren't responding to our hail. They are charging their main cannons. Volus looked up, a flicker of his old cold pride returning to his eyes. The purge has begun, he whispered. You may have woken the station, but you cannot wake the soldiers. They only know the old songs, and they will play them until there is nothing left but ash. I looked at Ilara. Can the Ethel Guard defend itself? Not against the whole fleet, she said, her skin dimming in fear. We have the shields, but the weapon systems are still tied to the old resonance. We can't fire without a collective consensus. Then we don't fire, I said, my mind racing. We do something else, something they won't expect. What? We talk to them, I said. Not as a queen, not as an empire, as a father and a mother. We show them the noise. We show them the kid. They will not listen to words, Kaelin, Volus sneered. They are Xylari. They only understand the frequency of the law. Then we change the frequency, I said, grabbing my jacket from the chair. Ilara, get me to the communications hub. If they want a show, let's give them the biggest, loudest, messiest broadcast in the history of the hegemony. Let's show them what it means to be noisy. As we ran toward the hub, the station shuddered again as the first shots hit the shields. The floor was apologizing under my feet, but I didn't care. I was 34 years old, 5,000 light years from home, and I was about to go live on the biggest stage in the galaxy. "Hey, Alara," I panted as we sprinted through the flickering amber light. "Yes? I hope you've got a good singing voice, because we're about to improvise a whole new anthem." The battle for Ethelgard had begun, but it wasn't going to be one with lasers or shields. It was going to be one with a joke, a cry, and the stubborn, beautiful refusal to be perfect. The lesson was beginning to bloom, and the cost of not learning it was finally clear. A world of perfect, silent statues drifting forever in a void of their own making. I wasn't going to let that happen. Not on my watch. "Buckle up, kid," I whispered, thinking of the life growing inside Alara. "It's about to get real loud." The communications hub was not a room so much as it was the inside of a massive, pulsing throat. Ribs of white-hot energy arched over us, and the air tasted like copper and old memories. Outside the reinforced transparent shielding of Ethelgard, the Ninth Fleet was a swarm of silver needles, stitching lines of lethal fire across our flickering amber shields. Every hit felt like a hammer blow to the base of my skull. "They aren't just trying to disable us, Kalen," Alara said, her voice strained as she leaned against a console that was bleeding iridescent fluid. "They are firing at the neural conduits. They want to lobotomize the station. If they succeed, the Ethelgard becomes a dead husk." "Yeah, well, I've never been a fan of quiet neighborhoods," I grunted, my fingers dancing over a holographic interface that looked like a plate of glowing spaghetti. My Cortex bridge was throwing up error messages faster than I could swipe them away. I'm trying to bypass the military encryption, but Volus wasn't kidding. These guys have locks on their locks. It's like trying to break into a vault using a toothpick and a bad attitude. "Use the Noi," Alara whispered, her hand finding mine amidst the chaos. "The encryption is built on logic and mathematical symmetry. It expects a pattern. Give it the one thing it cannot process." I looked at her, then back at the screen. "You want me to upload my brain?" "Alara, that's a dangerous neighborhood. Even I get lost in there sometimes." "Do it, Kalen, before the shields fail." I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and slammed my hand onto the primary uplink. It wasn't like plugging in a cable. It was like falling into a hurricane made of mirrors. For a split second, I saw everything. The thousands of Xylari pilots in the fleet, their minds locked in a rigid, terrifyingly quiet formation. They weren't angry. They were just synchronized. They were a machine made of meat and duty, waiting for a signal that no longer existed. I didn't give them a speech. I didn't give them a manifesto. I gave them a Saturday morning. I flooded the network with the sound of a toaster popping, the smell of burnt toast, the feeling of a pebble in a shoe, and the absolute crushing embarrassment of forgetting someone's name at a party. I gave them the noise of being human, the millions of tiny, insignificant failures that make up a life. On the tactical display, the Ninth Fleet hesitated. The silver needles drifted, their perfect formation shivering like a reflection in a disturbed pond. "What is happening?" Volus screamed from the corner, where he was being held by two guards whose ears were twitching in rhythmic sync with my thoughts. "What are you doing to my soldiers?" "I'm giving them a choice, Volus," I shouted, my eyes snapped open, glowing with a faint reflected amber light. "I'm showing them that they don't have to be part of your symphony if the song sucks." Suddenly, the intercoms across the entire fleet and the Ethelgard itself erupted. It wasn't music. It was a cry, but it wasn't a cry of pain. It was a birth shout. In the center of the hub, a holographic projection of Alara's womb bloomed into existence. It wasn't the sterile blue diagram the physicians had shown before. It was a riot of color: gold, red, violet, and that stubborn human white. And at the center of it, a tiny heart was beating. It wasn't beating in the perfect metronomic rhythm of the Xylari. It was skipping. It was racing. It was improvising. "The integration," Alara whispered, tears of violet light tracking down her face. "It's not just in me. It's in the signal." The Ninth Fleet stopped firing. One by one, the ships began to peel away from the attack formation. They weren't retreating. They were just stopping. I could feel it through the link. Thousands of pilots, for the first time in their lives, looking at the person in the cockpit next to them and wondering what they were thinking. You've ruined them, Volus whispered, falling to his knees. You've turned an empire into a crowd. A crowd is just a group of people waiting to meet each other, Volus, I said, stepping away from the console as the mental pressure subsided. My head felt like it had been kicked by a mule, but my heart was light. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I need to sit down before I barf on your historical artifacts. But the victory felt hollow as a sudden sharp pain caused Elara to gasp. She collapsed, and the glowing patterns beneath her skin began to pulse with a frantic, erratic light. The child, she gasped. It's not waiting for the ninth cycle, Kalen. It wants out, now. Now, I yelped, my voice hitting a pitch only dogs could hear. We're in the middle of a space battle and a systemic collapse. Can it wait until we at least get some clean towels? The Ethel Guard is responding, the doctor said, rushing into the hub. The station is diverting all remaining power to the birthing chamber. It's not a choice, Envoy Thorn. The station is the womb now. I looked at the silver needles of the fleet outside, then at the dying queen in my arms. The humanistic theme I had been joking about was no longer a punchline. It was a demand. Life doesn't wait for the certainty of a safe harbor. It happens in the middle of the storm, or it doesn't happen at all. Right, I said, scooping Elara up. She felt lighter than she looked, like she was made of hope and starlight. Let's go see what kind of mess we've made of the universe. The birthing chamber was the very heart of the Ethelgard, a place where the psio matter was so dense it felt like walking through warm honey. The walls were translucent, showing the flickering stars of the nebula outside, but they were no longer gray. They were a vibrant, pulsing pink, reacting to the biological urgency of the moment. Elara lay on a bed of living moss, her long ears twitching in a rhythmic cadence I'd never heard before. She wasn't a queen now. She was a mother, and she was terrified. Kalen, she breathed, her hand gripping mine with enough strength to bruise bone. The resonance. It's so loud. I can hear everyone. I can hear the soldiers in the ships, the people in the lower tiers. They are all waiting. They are all inside me. Anna, then let them in, I said, sitting beside her and wiping the sweat from her brow with the sleeve of my jacket. Don't try to control it, Elara. That was the old way. Just let it be messy. Let it be what it is. I don't know how to be this, she cried. Nobody does, I said. And for the first time, I wasn't joking. I was 34 years old, and I finally realized that my uselessness was actually my greatest asset. Everyone in the history of everything has been winging it, from the first fish that crawled onto land to the first guy who thought he could fly a rocket. We're all just making it up as we go. That's the secret, Elara. That's the human gift. We don't need a map to find our way home. She looked at me, and I saw her fear transform into a fierce, desperate resolve. She stopped fighting the noise. She opened herself to the chaos. The station responded with a roar that shook the very foundations of the hegemony. The amber lights turned to a blinding, brilliant gold. Outside, the Ninth Fleet didn't fire. They didn't move. They simply watched as the Ethelgard began to glow like a new sun. The birth wasn't a clinical procedure. It was a cosmic event. When the child finally arrived, it didn't cry. It hummed. It was small, with skin the color of a summer twilight and ears that were shorter than a Zalari's, but longer than a human's. Its eyes were not violet, but a deep, swirling brown, the color of Earth's soil. But it was the effect the child had on the station that was the real revelation. As soon as it drew its first breath, the great silence ended, but the old resonance didn't return. Instead, everyone on the Ethelgard, every soldier, every noble, every worker, suddenly felt a ping, not a command, not a shared thought, but a feeling of presence. It was as if a billion individual lights had been turned on at once. It's a bridge, the physician whispered, falling to her knees in awe. It's not merging us, it's introducing us. I looked down at the tiny, messy life in Elara's arms. It looked up at me, and for a second, I felt a joke form in my mind. Something about how it had its mother's ears and its father's lack of a plan. But the joke died in my throat. I felt a surge of love so powerful it made my knees weak. I had been an expendable diplomat, a statistical neutrality, a man who hid behind sarcasm because he was afraid of being seen. But looking at this child, I realized that my flaws hadn't just saved the Empire. They had created something better. "He's beautiful," I whispered. "He is a riot," Ilara corrected, her voice weak but filled with a profound peace. Suddenly, the doors to the chamber burst open. Volus stood there, but he wasn't alone. He was accompanied by a dozen soldiers from the Ninth Fleet. They weren't holding their weapons. They were holding nothing. They just stood there, looking at the child. Volus stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the baby. He reached out a trembling hand, then stopped. He looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't see an enemy. I saw a man who had been lost in the dark for a long time and had finally found a candle. "Is this the end?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "No, Volus," I said, standing up and placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's the prologue. And the best part is, nobody knows how it ends." The transformation had begun. It was painful, it was confusing, and it was going to be a lot of work. The hegemony was dead, and the future was a giant, terrifying blank page. But as the child hummed a melody that the Vanguard had never heard before, I knew that we were finally ready to start writing. "So," I said, looking around at the stunned faces of the Xylari, "who knows how to change a diaper? Because I'm pretty sure that's the first step in building a new civilization." "Yes, Sir Nurum," one of the soldiers, a giant of a man with armor scarred by battle, stepped forward and tilted his head. "What is a diaper?" "Oh boy," I sighed, grinning despite the exhaustion. "We've got a lot of work to do, but hey, at least the coffee is finally starting to taste like something." As the amber light of the Vanguard softened into a warm, welcoming glow, I realized that I wasn't afraid anymore. I was 34 years old, 5,000 light years from home, and I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The riot had just begun. The fires outside the Vanguard did not go out with a bang. They drifted away like embers in a cooling breeze. The Ninth Fleet, once a wall of silver death, had scattered into a loose, uncoordinated cluster of curiosity. Without the rigid, forced synchronization of the old resonance, the soldiers weren't quite sure what to do with their hands. Some were weeping, a sound the Xylari hadn't made in generations, while others were simply staring at their own palms, as if seeing them for the first time. In the birthing chamber, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and something impossibly sweet, like lilies in a thunderstorm. I was sitting on the floor, leaning my back against a translucent pillar that was pulsing a soft, sleepy amber. My legs felt like they were made of overcooked noodles, and my head was thumping with a rhythm that translated to, "You need a nap that lasts 3 decades." "He is sleeping," Ilara whispered. She was sitting up, the mossy bed molding itself to her form to provide support. In her arms, the child, our riot, was a small bundle of violet-tinted skin and brown, messy hair. "Smart kid," I croaked. "Sleeping through the end of an empire is a high-tier move. I should have tried that during the Great Mars Recession of 2294. Volus was still standing by the door. He hadn't moved in an hour. His long ears were drooping, and the pearlescent glow of his skin had settled into a neutral, humble gray. He looked at the child, then at me, his gaze flickering with a confusion that was no longer hostile. "The fleet is asking for instructions," Volus said, his voice stripped of its usual melodic arrogance. "They are disconnected. They feel a void where the command used to be. They are asking who is in charge." I looked at Ilara. She looked back at me, her violet eyes reflecting the flickering stars outside. "Tell them no one is in charge," she said firmly. "Tell them to look at the person to their left and the person to their right. Tell them to ask each other what they want for dinner. Tell them the age of the symphony is over and the age of the conversation has begun." Volus bowed. It wasn't the stiff, ceremonial bow of an advisor to a queen. It was the slow, thoughtful bow of a man acknowledging a truth he didn't quite like, but couldn't deny. He turned and walked out, his footsteps sounding heavy and individual on the living floor. "You did it, Kaelin," Ilara said, her hand reaching out to find mine. "We did it," I corrected, giving her fingers a gentle squeeze. "And by it, I mean we basically set fire to the most stable government in the quadrant. Humanity is going to be so proud of me." or they're going to give me a very stern talking to and then exile me to a moon with no atmosphere. They cannot have you back, she said, her voice gaining a hint of its old regal authority. You are a part of the Ethelgard now. You are the noise that keeps us awake. I leaned my head back against the pillar. For the first time in my 34 years, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence with a joke. I didn't feel the need to hide behind a mask of sarcasm or play the expendable card. The theme I'd been running from my whole life, the idea that my flaws, my messiness, and my loud, uncoordinated heart were actually valuable, wasn't just a theory anymore. It was breathing in the arms of a queen. The physician who had helped with the birth, a woman named Thera, approached us. She carried a tray of small, glowing fruits, her ears angled toward me with a genuine warmth. Envoy Thorn, she said softly, I have spent my life studying the perfection of our biology. I thought every deviation was a failure, but watching you, I realized that perfection is just a form of stagnation. You are very inefficient, but you are very alive. I'll take that as a compliment, Thera, I grinned. Inefficiency is my middle name. Well, actually, it's Michael, but let's go with inefficiency for the history books. She laughed. It was a small, experimental sound, like a bird learning a new song. The station is changing, too. The walls are no longer correcting our movements. They are allowing us to stumble. Good on, I said. Stumbling is how you know you're moving. As the hours passed, the Ethelgard began to recalibrate. It wasn't the cold, calculated recalibration of a machine, but the slow, wandering adjustment of a forest in spring. The light shifted from amber to a deep, warm honey. The corridors hummed with the sound of thousands of individual voices, no longer a unified hum, but a beautiful, chaotic chatter. I watched Ilara as she looked at our son. She wasn't just a queen anymore, and I wasn't just a jester. We were two beings who had dared to be broken in a world that demanded we be whole, and in that brokenness, we had found a resonance that no empire could ever replicate. What will we call him? I asked. Ilara looked down at the boy whose eyes were just beginning to flutter open, revealing that deep, earth-brown color. Something noisy, she whispered. Something that sounds like a question? How about Riot? I suggested. She smiled. Perhaps we will stick to something a little more traditional for your world, but he will always be our beautiful Riot. I closed my eyes, finally letting the exhaustion take me. I knew the road ahead would be brutal. There would be trials, there would be resistance, and there would be moments where we'd wish for the quiet certainty of the old ways. But as I drifted off to sleep, I felt a single, small hand wrap around my thumb. It was a tiny, fragile grip, but it felt stronger than any fleet in the galaxy. I was Kalen Thorne. I was 34. I was a disaster, and I was exactly where I needed to be. 6 months, or rather 2 full orbital cycles of the Ethelgard, had passed since the night the stars didn't go out. The station was no longer the pristine clinical marvel it had once been. There were scuff marks on the floors where children, both Zelari and the few human families who had arrived as part of the new integration initiative, played. The living walls had grown patches of wild, multicolored moss that didn't respond to any central command. It looked messy. It looked lived in. I was standing on a balcony overlooking the Great Hall, watching the first joint session of the new convergence. There was no throne of decision anymore. Instead, there was a circle of chairs, real wooden chairs imported from Earth, alongside the shifting bioglobes of the Zelari. Ilara was there, sitting not at the head, but as part of the circle. She was wearing a simple tunic of woven light, her long ears draped comfortably over her shoulders. Beside her, in a small floating bassinet, was the boy we had eventually named Julian. Volus was speaking. He wasn't talking about continuity or lineage. He was talking about the logistics of sharing water filtration tech with a colony of refugees from the Outer Rim. He stumbled over his words occasionally, pausing to check his own notes, a human habit he'd picked up. He looked more tired than he used to, but he also looked satisfied. I walked down the stairs, my boots making a loud, rhythmic thud, thud, thud on the floor. I didn't try to walk softly. I didn't try to apologize to the ground. "You're late," Volus said, looking up from his slate with a mock scowl. "I'm humanly punctual," I replied, taking my seat in the circle. which means I'm here exactly when I was supposed to be, provided you factor in a 3-minute detour to find my favorite socks. A ripple of genuine laughter went around the room. It wasn't the controlled, thin laughter of the old court. It was a deep, varied sound, a symphony of individual amusement. We were just discussing the new trade routes, Alara said, her eyes catching mine, and the fact that the Human Coalition wants to send a team of musicians to perform in the High Conservatory. Musicians? I raised an eyebrow. Tell them to send a rock band. This place could use some drums. The glass trees will love the vibration. We will consider it, Volus muttered, though I saw him make a note on his slate. After the session, Alara and I walked through the gardens. The silver pool was liquid again, but it didn't reflect a frozen perfection. It showed the shifting, chaotic patterns of the clouds above. I stopped by a patch of bright white flowers, the ones that had first bloomed when I challenged the council. I knelt down and plucked one, tucking it into the lapel of my jacket. "You've changed, Kalen," Alara said softly, stopping beside me. "I have?" I looked down at my hands. They were calloused, scarred from helping repair the neural conduits during the first month of the transition. "I don't know. I still make bad jokes. I still can't find my keys. I'm still the same guy who occurred at you." "No," she said, reaching out to turn my face toward hers. "You no longer use those jokes as a wall. You use them as a bridge. You aren't hiding anymore." She was right. I felt it in the way I stood, in the way I didn't feel the need to look for an exit every time the room got too quiet. I had spent my whole life thinking my flaws made me a liability, a mistake to be managed. But here, in this impossible palace at the edge of the galaxy, I had learned that my flaws were the only thing that made me real. I looked out at the nebula, the swirling colors of gas and dust forming patterns that no one could predict. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to solve the equation. I was just happy to be part of the math. I spent most of my 34 years feeling like a rough draft that someone had forgotten to finish. I thought that to be important or worthy, I had to be like the heroes in the vids, stoic, perfect, and always knowing exactly what to say. I treated my humor like a shield because I was terrified that if I stopped talking, people would see the cracks. I thought the cracks were where I was broken. But standing here, watching a civilization learn to breathe again, I've realized I had it all backwards. The cracks aren't where we're broken, they're where the light gets in. They're the places where we connect with everything else that's messy and uncertain and beautiful. I used to be an expendable diplomat, a guy sent to fill a seat because it didn't matter if I didn't come back. But I've learned that nobody is expendable. Not when you realize that every single one of us is a riot of possibilities waiting to happen. I'm not a hero, and I'm definitely not perfect. I'm just a man who isn't afraid of the silence anymore. I've learned to love the gaps in the story because that's where the best parts are written. I finally stopped trying to be the answer and started being the question. And honestly, it's a much better way to live. I look at the Xylari, at their long ears twitching to the sound of their own thoughts. And I look at my son, who is a living bridge between two worlds that should never have met. I wonder about the people back on Earth, still trying so hard to be perfect, still trying to build walls of certainty around their lives to keep the noise out. I wonder, what parts of yourself have you been hiding because you thought they were mistakes? What if the very things you're most ashamed of, the messy, loud, unpredictable parts of your soul, are actually the only things that can save your world? If you stop trying to be the perfect version of yourself, who would you actually be? I pick up Julian from his bassinet. He looks at me and lets out a small, gurgling hum. I don't look for a translator. I don't need a cortex bridge to tell me what it means. I just laugh, and for the first time in my life, I don't care who's listening.